Take it away, Magda.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. And I'm so thrilled. First of all, I have to thank Foster, because Foster helps me a great deal. Without him, I don't know how I could put this together. And Mark Barron, who has helped me in the past, he's been invaluable. And tonight's guest is David Thomson, and I love to introduce him. And David, are you? I don't. Let me see if I can get.
I'm waiting to be introduced.
Okay, tell us about yourself, and then Foster will take over.
Well, I was born in London as the bombs fell in 1941. I came to this country in 1975. I taught at Dartmouth, then I moved to San Francisco, and I've been a freelance ever since. And since the age of about 4, I had to see movies. My parents took me to see Henry V, the Olivier version. I was terrified at it. I couldn't understand it. I had to be taken out in tears. But as soon as I got into the lobby, I said, "Take me back, take me back. I want to be frightened again." So I have this kind of obsessive compulsive relationship with the movies. And I think most people of my sort of age do. And I've been extremely lucky in that I have just about managed to make a living talking about them, writing about them, and teaching them and that kind of thing. And here I am, your guest. I'm very happy to be here.
And I'm very pleased to be conducting this interview. I'm a huge fan of David's work. We do the same thing. We're competitors, but I don't feel that way at all. He is unique in what he does. And this book is, that we're talking about tonight, A Light in the Dark, A History of Movie Directors. It is written with such snap and verve and energy, and David makes writing seem so easy. It just flows off the page. What I love about the writing is, like me, David is a very opinionated guy, but he presents his opinions in a way that is very open. You realize that he would be open to argument and discussion. He's not set. In other words, here it is and no discussion. No, this is my opinion. Do you have a different opinion? Let's argue, which is wonderful. He invites you to argue off the page. And as you read the book, I think you'll find that sometimes you will want to him, and that's just terrific. So at any rate, I want to start, David, actually with the end of the book.
Yeah.
Not at the beginning. You end what is, in a sense, a very good overview of the history of film directors with 2 recent films, Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and Martin Scorsese's The Irishman, which bring us up to date to recent movies. You have serious reservations about both films. Why did you choose to end the book with those 2 films in particular?
Well, first of all, great to see you again, Foster, and thank you for your introduction, and thank you for having me, and thank you for being who you are. I chose those films simply because as I was writing the book, they were the 2, I thought, most impressive, in a way, most portentous films that were available at that time. I finished writing the book sort of as they came out. And as you indicate, while they clearly are the work of extraordinary directors who have done great things in the past, Scorsese especially, I would say, I found them both very problematic. And they, for me, embodied what I find to be a great dilemma that we face looking at our screens now, which is that for several years, I have felt that the things I could see on television, long form series, streaming series, everything from, say, The Wire, which was one of the early versions, to Underground Railroad, playing now, which I think is a masterpiece. I found those series, many of which went on years and many, many hours, I found them more impressive, more involving than the movies playing in the theaters. And I think it's very interesting to ask ourselves whether, now that we're feeling better about ourselves, our health, our cities, are we going to go back to the theaters, or have we picked up an alternative habit, that of staying in our own room, which has many advantages, which seems a lot cheaper than going to the movies, and watching the new series that come along, very variable in quality, but when they're good, I would contend they're absolutely extraordinary. And here we are at a great crisis in America's relationship with racism. And it cries out for a masterpiece film, a film that everybody can watch and feel terrified by, shattered by, but enormously interested in. And the film comes along on long form television. And you cannot really conceive that Underground Railroad would have been done for theaters. And I think that indicates that the culture of watching storytelling on screens is moving on to a new format.
But in a way, your selection of those two films by masterful contemporary film directors, and the two films you found somewhat lacking or disappointing, or dare I say, not completely relevant, was that accidental or symptomatic of a larger turn in the fortune of the motion picture?
Well, that's a fascinating question, and I can't give even an opinionated, definitive answer to it. But I mean, if you take Scorsese, who I think was about 75 when he made The Irishman, an enormously distinguished career, several great films. He was, for a long time, the American auteur, the American film director that young people were probably most likely to name. And he sort of got the idea that The Irishman was going to be his swan song. It would be the gangster film to end all gangster films. He developed extraordinarily expensive technology so that he could play with the characters' ages. And he spent about $200 million on it. Well, the film didn't get that money back or anything like it. And I really don't believe in movies that cost that much anymore. I think there is a degree of vanity and pretension in a venture that big. I much prefer the idea that someone might make something simply, something small, like Nomadland, for instance, which, you know, obviously cost a tiny fraction of that, and which I think made a deeper impact on a lot of people because it showed them a kind of life that they had not really seen on screen before.
Whereas we had seen The Irishman before.
That's what I felt.
I thought it was very accomplished.
It is.
But I had seen it before, if not literally, then figuratively. It was nothing new for the director. And so my feeling is, though it's just a year or two old, it's already sort of dropped from consciousness.
I have
that well remembered from a year or two ago.
No. And in other words, it didn't have the impact on the culture that, let's say, Taxi Driver and Raging Bull had once upon a time. Those were films, they're still there. People still look at them. But they were films that made an enormous immediate impact in, 75 and 81, whenever they came out. And they were relevant. They were for the moment. Taxi Driver, I saw Taxi Driver very soon after I had come to America, when New York was a pretty new place for me. And I knew, being in a packed theater watching it in Manhattan, that the overlap between the atmosphere of that audience and that film was uncanny and very important and very valuable. And I felt the audience felt that too.
That was not the case with The Irishman, which
Not in
felt
the least.
almost quaint or easy or from the past, though very, very accomplished.
Absolutely. I agree with you completely.
Okay. I hope that's not the only time we will agree all evening. Now, I want to go back and ask another maybe unusual question as an
Yeah.
early one for our discussion. Your book is, in a sense, it's called A History of Movie Directing, but in writing this enormous subject in a relatively trim a number of pages, not more than 300 pages, you had to eliminate a lot.
Yes.
On reflection, are there directors you wish you had included? And I hope there'll be a part two to the book. But did you
Yeah.
make any omissions that now strike you as perhaps the wrong choice or you regret?
Well, I don't know about the wrong choices, because I think all the people who are in the book deserve to be there. But of course, a lot of other people deserve to be there too. I was talking to a friend only a few days ago, and he said, you know, the chapter I miss the most, because I know what he means to you, would be Max Ophuls. And Max Ophuls, who worked in so many different countries, never very happily, never very secure in his career, a traveler, another kind of nomad, made some of the most beautiful, poignant films ever. And I would love to have included him in the book. I would love to have included a documentarian. And I think it would have been the Frenchman, Chris Marker, that I would have put in there probably. There are many others that I would love to have put in there. I'm very fond of Michael Powell, a director I knew well personally, and I felt that omission. I could do several more volumes in this ilk if the publishers would allow me, and we'll have to see about that.
Now, you don't discuss my own two personal favorites, which is fine because then there's more room in my book for me to discuss. And that is my two favorites are Kazan and Douglas Sirk.
Yes.
I gather you don't mention Sirk's name at all, but I gather you do respect Kazan.
Oh, I think Kazan is one of the all-time great directors of actors, and he was the figurehead in the late 40s into the 50s and 60s for a whole new way of acting in American films, the influence of which is still with us and very important in that way. I would love to have written about him. I knew him a little bit. He was a very tricky person, personally, and he did not like some things I wrote about him, but I would love to have written about him properly. Douglas Sirk, you mentioned, and you know, Douglas Sirk in many ways is the Germanic director who came to America and had really the most successful career, more successful even than Fritz Lang and even Lubitsch. Sirk made a certain kind of American movie that on the face of it, it's very hard to believe a German had made them because they are so understanding of America. I know in your coming book on the 50s, you're going to go crazy on Sirk, and you will say this much better than I can. But from the moment he arrived here in the early 40s as a filmmaker, he was doing things differently. He was doing things that no one else seemed to want to do. He made some very interesting Chekhov adaptations, which are not well known. But then when he was at Universal in the 50s and teamed up with almost the least likely star, Rock Hudson, he made Hudson's career, and he made a certain kind of romance about America that they work as romances, but they've got a quite subtle critical sense to them
Yes,
too.
and it's that there is the sense in his work that we're looking at America through the perspective of an outsider.
I agree.
He's not one of us. And indeed, after his masterpiece, Imitation of Life, he left us never to return.
Yes.
He could
No,
have, that film is such a hit, he could have called the shots and made
Yeah.
15 more melodramas, but he left.
Yeah.
But
But
he
you
never,
know,
he was
you
bitter
mentioned-
about America. He was an outsider, and he saw us critically, and you feel that in the films. But I want to focus that now on you.
Yeah.
You're not American born, and I
Right.
felt in rereading your book that you mention America and see America from somewhat of an outsider's point of view. That is, you didn't grow up seeing movies in America. You talk about seeing movies in London.
Yes,
Is that at all an accurate perception?
absolutely.
You obviously you live here, but you're not a born American.
I was in love with America from a very early age. I'm not certain how far it went, but I believe that my mother had a romantic feeling for an American airman who gave me a leather flying cap, which was one of my most treasured possessions. And it was a sort of emblem of America. And as I grew older, America to me meant jazz, crazy about jazz. It meant Hemingway, Fitzgerald, Faulkner, those kind of writers, and it meant the movies. And I yearned to come to America. I didn't really think about coming to live here, but I yearned to be in America because I just felt from a distance that the culture had an idealism and an ease and a fun and a space. England was so cramped, you know, and I wanted to be in those places. And I came much too late, but I did come eventually, and I'm still here. I'm an American citizen. Most of you will not have chosen to be an American citizen. I did. However, I'm fairly alert to what's going on, and the America I dreamed of from afar and loved from afar and loved when I came here, it's not the same America that we have now. And there is a part of me now that would certainly contemplate going back to England for at least extended visits. I'm like Cirque, if you like. I've become much more critical of the American romance than I was originally.
And that does filter into this book.
I think so.
That criticism filters into the book.
Yep.
But it enriches it because you're looking at American movies, and you write mostly, but not entirely, about American films from a slightly detached perspective, or perspective different from somebody born here.
Yeah.
Your viewpoint would be different from mine, for instance, in that.
No, I can imagine that. But you know, you said something earlier about Cirque. You said he was an outsider. I have the feeling that America has become more and more a country of outsiders. I don't feel that many people are really at home here anymore. I think that's part of the malaise, part of the pain and difficulty of it. And I don't know how that's going to get worked out. It's a very, very big problematical area. But some way or another, our movies have to try and deal with this. They have to try and find a new kind of American dream, a new kind of American hope that we can believe in. And the reason I stress Underground Railroad, dark as it is that is telling a message that we need to attend to.
Now, speaking of that, I felt in 2 chapters in the book, you say it, and you certainly suggest it, that you were uncomfortable even having to write the chapters, and that is the chapter on female directors, and the chapter on minority filmmakers. That those categorizations themselves make you uncomfortable, and they describe a kind of marginalization while there's an attempt to overcome it. They almost emphasize it. Am I right? Those 2 chapters gave you some discomfort, just in terms of the labeling.
I mean, not discomfort because I didn't want to talk about those directors. Discomfort that one sort of is obliged to take them on as separate chapters. I mean, we should not need to separate women and men directors. One reason we do is because the movies, Hollywood, laid down a culture for us in which superior, powerful men gazed at and fantasized over women. That is one of the chief reasons why being female in America is so difficult, and why being a female filmmaker is so difficult. And the same applies to people of color. I think that almost by virtue of the difficulty those categories of people find themselves in now, they're probably going to make the most interesting films. I mean, clearly, Underground Railroad could not have been made by a white director. For a long time, we lived in a film culture where no Black director would have had the opportunity to make a film like that. You know, because it's a big film, it's like 10 hours at least. That's changing, and that's good, and that's great. But I want to be able to talk about Barry Jenkins as a film director, not a Black film director, because that is bringing in the framework of a kind of ghetto that I want to shatter and throw away. He is a film director, a great film director, I think.
But at the moment, we're still dealing in terms of those categories.
Absolutely, and there's enormous awkwardness because of it. And, you know, I think that many film writers, I'm sure it's happened to you too, have been told by editors, I don't think you can quite say that, or I don't think you could do that, you know, because there are so many delicate feelings out there. Well, there are so many delicate feelings because we've behaved so badly for so long. And we've got to get over that. And, you know, films have always been about attractive people, about romance with an element of sexuality in them. And that should not be denied. You can't look at a Douglas Sirk film, you can't look at Written on the Wind, say, without knowing that Robert Stack, Rock Hudson, Dorothy Malone are very attractive people. They're very uneasy, unhappy people, but they're very attractive people. Now, to say somebody in a movie of whatever sex, whatever gender choice is attractive is a problematic thing these days.
To what extent did you find yourself writing under the aegis of cancel culture and all of the other identity politics that we're struggling with now? To what extent did you find yourself censoring your own sentences and not allowing yourself to say things you might have said 3, 4, 5, 10 years ago?
Oh, is
that a fair question?
It's absolutely fair question, and it's there. And I had talks with my editor on the book in which he said, you know, you tend, as I did, you tend to talk about a film director as a he. It's very simple to change that. And it is, and that kind of change needs to be made. And it needs to be made on not just sentences about filmmakers, about sentences about every walk of life in this country. And it's a long, hard slog to get that done. And there are a lot of people who resist it and object to it and are very insecure over it. But yes, I felt that pressure. And I simply don't believe there is a writer on film these days who doesn't feel that kind of pressure.
Did you feel at any moment, why am I writing about white men at a time when white men are being pushed off their pedestal of cultural power? Most of your book is written about the wonderful work of white male directors, starting with D.W. Griffith and Fritz Lang and Jean Renoir, going right up to Martin Scorsese and Quentin Tarantino. That's your subject.
Yes.
White men have made most of the great films. That is a historical fact.
Well, it certainly is, and I tried to do what I could to leaven that, and you know, I mean, you say that the chapter on Black directors felt a little uneasy, uncomfortable. I know what you mean. There was another way in which I loved doing it, in which I welcome doing it. And I love being able to talk about a director like Carl Franklin, say, who is not widely esteemed, not nearly as widely esteemed as he could be and should be. Part of those chapters, for me, the pleasure of it is bringing some names forward and some film titles that the audience will not know readily, and saying, you know, that's a film that you should seek out. A Girl Who Walks Home Alone at Night by Anna Lily Amirpour, a film that cost about $50,000, black and white, wonderful film. I made a pitch for that, and for other films too. But
you, David, you were very frank in those two chapters. You said some of the work of female directors I was asked to write about, I don't like their work.
Well, I
don't like their films. And you said, I know Spike Lee's important, but I don't have a strong response to his work. I prefer Carl Franklin.
And I picked the view. I mean, it's part of being opinionated, that I have as much right to say I didn't like a film as that I do like a film. And I think, you know, anyone who's an historian like you, a teacher, you know how necessary it is to let students know, let your readers know, that while you love these films, you really don't like those films so much. So that you are one of the great authorities on Otto Preminger, a great director, another man who could have been in the book. And Otto Preminger, I think, I'm sure you think, is a lot better than Stanley Kramer, a director with whom he could be compared because they take on big social, political issues. And Preminger is just streets ahead, you know.
Yes.
That's my opinion. I think it's yours too.
Yes, far more sophisticated. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. But I did notice where the Me Too culture there was a discomfort when you were writing about Louis Buñuel, who would certainly not pass the Me Too test, at least in terms of his subject matter. I don't know about his private life, but his subject matter.
Yeah.
You do describe some delicious scenes in Buñuel.
Well,
these scenes would not pass the current litmus test.
I mean, I certainly felt this while I was doing the book. You asked about a particular moment. I knew that I had to do Louis Buñuel because he's almost the inventor of surreal cinema and a personal favorite. And I knew I had to write about Belle de Jour, which probably one of his 2 or 3 favorite films for me. And I started writing about Belle de Jour. And I realized that I was falling into the sexual fantasy that the film is based upon. And I realized, and it was quite a shocking realization, that a film that was made in, 1966, I think, I don't think that film could be made today. I think it's still a masterpiece. I think it was an extraordinary event when it played in 66. I don't believe if Buñuel were alive today, and if Catherine Deneuve was still the age she was in that film, I don't think they'd be allowed to make that film, or that it would play in our theaters. Now that is a really shocking, disturbing thing, because that could threaten to take away the fantasy roots of film altogether. And I don't know how we're going to work that out. It's a huge problem.
But if we submit romance and sexuality to the litmus test of political correctness, we may throw the whole thing out the window. Nothing will be acceptable.
Foster, I have a serious fear that the thing you and I probably love the most could be thrown out the window. I think that we're in a culture that could say, well, you know, I don't think we need the movies. We're going to move. And you know, we have to remember the movies came out of nowhere. For centuries in our history, we didn't know what they were. We didn't know what a photograph is. And a lot of what we're talking about comes from the nature and the origin of the photograph itself. The thing that you can hold up in your hand as a piece of reality and dream about it. And just as films came into being, I seriously believe they could go out of being. The automobile, you know, I mean, America for decades believed the automobile was as vital as anything else in the society. I think it's quite possible, and we can see it now. The automobile could go. And, you know, it's not that there won't be substitutes for it, for transportation in the broadest sense, but the damage the automobile has done to us, it may kill us more surely than all the wars put together. So, you know, this enterprise we're in can be overtaken by change quicker than you can imagine.
And we're talking about the pandemic and people not going to theaters, and
Yeah.
people may not ever return to theaters in the same number as before.
Yeah.
Out of the habit. Good, as you're saying, good material on TV, better than what you pay $15 or $20 for at the theater. I was mentioning before, and not very tactful of me, I went to see, I'm ashamed to admit it, Godzilla vs. Kong in 3D, because I love 3D. I hated the movie. There was nobody in a big theater, 3 people.
I went to see The Father recently in San Francisco, film I liked very, very much. And I went with my wife, and there was one other person in the theater. And, you know, people are saying, oh, I can't wait to go back to theaters. In fact, it's been possible to go back to theaters for some time.
People are not going.
And they're not going.
They're not going.
Yeah.
I was delighted throughout the book. You have a wonderful balance between telling us a little bit about the biography of each of the main directors you write about, and the connection between biography and work. To what extent does it become a challenge in the current moment to give the director a pass on being a good person in order to be able to discuss his work? What if the director is a monster? I think most people would have said Fritz Lang was not a nice guy. You even intimate he may have killed his first wife.
Possible.
He made some great movies.
Yeah.
Does one thing have any impact on the other? Can't we appreciate his films and say he wasn't a very good person?
Well, look, we have 2 directors at least alive, more or less working or ready to work, Polanski and Woody Allen. I think they both had extremely variable careers, but I believe both of them made some great films. And I personally refuse to outlaw them on the grounds of what we think we know about them. I've always thought that Woody Allen is a dark, secretive person. I think in the same way Polanski is a dark, outrageous person. I've lived enough in the world of film to know that most directors are tough, ruthless, selfish, and with a pretty bad track record personally. And I will not throw the whole nature of cinema out because it has encouraged some bad people. It's deeply vexing problem, and I mean, I suspect in New York at the moment, a theater showing a Woody Allen film would probably be picketed.
Yes.
Even one of Woody Allen's great films, and there are, I think,
there are a number.
5 or
Yes.
6 absolutely great films, and this is a man who has not been charged and convicted of anything. He may have behaved strangely. I think that what happened with Sun Yi was a pretty tasteless move. I will leave it at that. But I've got to tell you, I know a lot of film directors who behaved as badly in the past, and no one ever noticed or spoke about it because the climate was completely different.
But
And
does that knowledge that we think we have force us or compel us to reevaluate the work in the light of personal revelations?
I would say fundamentally no. I think it can enrich your understanding of the work. Take Howard Hawks. Howard Hawks made films that were universally found to be entertaining. Howard Hawks was a chronic womanizer. If you knew every detail about how he treated everyone he had sex with, it's what it comes to, I think you'd be horrified. The films are still hilarious, brilliant, smart, and I'm not going to say they're not just because of that possibility, that private side to it. People are people, and sooner or later, most people do something they're ashamed of.
But are we entering too judgmental and puritanical a period?
We certainly are.
We're losing a sense of humor, even a sense of balance or proportion.
I agree with you entirely. And I mean, a lot of what you're talking about is generally described as the liberal interpretation of these people's lives. Don't forget what that prejudice could look like if it was taken over by illiberal forces. And then you're reminding yourself of the way in Germany in the 30s and in the world controlled by Germany later, people were outlawed with maximum prejudice because people disapproved of how they behaved. Very, very dangerous territory.
Very dangerous, yes. To bring it to a very personal moment, I had offered a course casually for next fall at the college called City Boys, the New York films of Martin Scorsese and Woody Allen.
Great course. I want to take it.
Well, no. And my chair, in consultation with my chair, she said, and I said myself, I feel I've made two errors. I can't call it City Boys because that will offend some people, the boys. She said, yep, that should be taken out. And then I said, I think Woody Allen would cause dissension. I asked students, and some of the students said, I would pick at your course if you offered the course.
Yeah.
I'm not offering the course.
Well, I'm sorry to hear.
Not happening.
Yeah. But I mean, what do you do with those students? How do you talk to them? Do you enter into an argument with them about it?
I tried to tactfully.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I did try to tactfully.
Yeah.
I tried to be sensitive. I said, I don't think that's fair, but we're not going to offer the course now because we have enough controversy, but at school. So I didn't want to go into that.
Well, you know, it's so interesting. Roman Polanski is as verboten as Woody Allen in many respects. He has a film, his most recent film, which I've not seen, which you can't see in this country because he's Roman Polanski. At the same time, within the period we're talking about, a book came out on Chinatown, The Making of Chinatown, a very good book, I thought. Bestseller. I mean, you know, it's a schizophrenic attitude because I think most people who've seen it know that Chinatown was a fabulous film, a wonderful portrait of LA and of America at a certain time. And yet, I don't know that you could play it in a movie theater for those reasons. Very bizarre situation.
Now, not that I want to fall into being guilty of what I'm accusing others of, but I did have a difficult moment at one point in the book.
Yeah.
With you.
Yeah.
When I perceived it as a defense of Leni Riefenstahl. I understand she is a powerful filmmaker, but I feel she used her art in the service of evil and that she was guilty.
Well, I mean, we're playing out the issues we've just been talking about.
Yeah.
I drew Leni Riefenstahl in to the part of the book where I was talking about female directors. And one of the reasons I did was because it's not only that she was a most remarkable cinematic stylist, she made a film in which she told the Nazi Party how to stage its rally so that she could make the film she wanted. That's breathtaking. nerve and confidence and gall. You know, I mean, not many people messed around with those guys when they wanted something. She did. I think Triumph of the Will is a terrifying film, although it's impossible for me not to see it in a post-1945 feeling. We know what that led to. Therefore, we immediately say, well, the film is evil. I'm not sure the film is evil. I'm not sure the film is so different from a number of films that were made in America in the 30s and that are being made now, because there is a fascistic element in the celebration of force and uniforms and guns that has always been there in film. I understand exactly what you're saying about Triumph of the Will. I would say, though, on the other hand, and I suspect you'd agree, that historically, culturally, every angle you can think of, we have to keep looking at Triumph of the Will.
Yeah, oh, I agree. I would never want to silence.
To understand what happened.
Absolutely. I show it to classes all the time.
Yeah.
I would never dream of censoring that film or Leni Riefenstahl while saying I don't approve of her, but I would never censor her.
No. If you feel I was defending her, then I take that very seriously, and you may well be right, and I made a mistake. I didn't mean to defend her. I've tried to say what I was trying to do, but you are a very sensitive and smart reader, and if you were offended and troubled, I take that seriously. Maybe I need to go back and redo that.
I want to.
I'm going
to open it to the floor for a minute, but I do want to talk about our very decided difference over Howard Hawks, whom you love. Yes. And I really appreciate your love. I reread with great relish your chapter. You communicate exactly what it is you like about him. Yes. If I tell you that my favorite Howard Hawks film is Land of the Pharaohs, you'll know where I stand with regard to Howard Hawks.
Yes.
I don't get him. I don't get it. I like Land of the Pharaohs and The Thing. Bringing Up Baby drives me wild. I can't tolerate it.
Why does it drive you wild? Because, I mean, you know, it's fabulously written. It's beautifully directed and organized. You know, Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn are gods.
She gets on my nerves.
She does? Did she always get on your nerves, or just in that film?
I think so. My favorite Katharine Hepburn performance is Suddenly Last Summer.
Oh, wow. Well, we do have big differences.
Yeah. I find her so shrill and so, I find it forced.
Yeah.
And if Howard Hawks' ideal woman is Lauren Bacall, he and I don't have the same taste.
I think he idealized nearly every woman he ever met.
I love the chapter because your passion for this director you explain it so clearly and crisply with such verve. I just don't share the enthusiasm. But what do you think of Land of the Pharaohs, which I love?
I'll tell you about me and Land of the Pharaohs. I have not seen it since it came out.
Oh, okay. See it again in a beautiful CinemaScope screen.
I will do it.
It's written by William Faulkner, after all.
Well, okay, we'll take that with a grain of salt, I think. But yeah, I will look at it again.
Yes, I do. Now you have a list of films in one chapter. And I was fascinated by the list of films that have dated and become stale and don't work anymore, but they were very acclaimed during their time, including Gentleman's Agreement, Going My Way, Marty, Gigi, Ben-Hur, Bridge on the River Kwai, The Quiet Man. And some of that list, I couldn't agree with you more, but I must defend Gigi, Ben-Hur, and Bridge on the River Kwai. I think those hold up.
Oh, well,
okay. They do what they're supposed to be doing.
Okay.
A great musical, a great epic, and a great war film.
Well, we are a perfect odd couple in many respects.
Can't change your mind about it. But you make the point that all of those films are so settled in their point of view. That there,
Yeah.
I guess there's no ambiguity or mystery or room for discussion. They're so clear about what they're going to be doing.
I've also got to say that I don't want to offend anyone, but biblical films are the end of the road for me, and I there's none of them I like. And you know, that we have a Bible as a book to read, that's fine, but I really do not like the way it's been turned into so many terrible films. And you know, it's very interesting. As you know, Ben-Hur was a huge hit when it came out. It won so many Oscars. You try finding someone who's seen Ben-Hur lately. I think a lot of the films that are in that list, Gigi may be an exception. I don't know people who see Bridge on the River Kwai anymore. Gentleman's Agreement, I don't know. I may be wrong, but I think films are made for now, always, and they date very fast. And what's so wonderful about the medium is that some of them are still fresh 100 years later.
Some retain their freshness, and the two of us could agree that they're still great.
Absolutely.
There are those films. There are those films.
Some is a big thing.
There are those films. I was very happy with your chapter on Hitchcock, which seems to me very fair. You praise his genius for what it is, not more, not less, and don't allow the rhetoric, the Me Too rhetoric, to interfere with the best of the work.
I can't wait for your book, because obviously Hitchcock is at his best in the 50s.
Absolutely, and I make that point.
I'm sure, and I really want to see what you're going to say.
And
I will get you on the show, and I will hold your feet to the fire.
Okay. Okay, Magda, I think we can open the floor to questions from the House.
Great, thank you so much. One question I had for David is, out of the news, what do you make of MGM getting bought by Amazon, and what does that mean for films?
Well, it's a sign of the times, so to say. I mean, for Foster and me, and for many others, MGM was like the flagship of the golden age of Hollywood. And to have it passing into this kind of ownership it's sad. It's inevitable. I mean, what it really means is the reason they have bought MGM is that they are buying the library of films, and particularly TV shows, that MGM possesses, which will then pass into streaming through Amazon's platform. And that's why they've done it. It's amazing that they're putting as much money as they are into it, because that indicates they think people are going to watch these films and shows for at least 10 years to make a profit for them. And, you know, one has to respect the people at Amazon on making that kind of decision, because that's what they're good at. I think it will be a little less likely that Amazon makes interesting movies, which they like to say they're in the business of doing. I think they're going to peddle that library very hard, and they're going to make more product that will go into that library in the same way.
Thank you. Question from Freddie. TV movies are showing more interracial married couples. Do you see this expanding into more widescreen movies?
It better. I watched The Pelican Brief again recently, if you remember, the film in which Denzel Washington and Julia Roberts are in partnership to solve a crime. It's a routine film, but it's okay. It's watchable. But it cries out for those two to at least kiss at the end. They become pals. They're fond of each other. The audience, I think, is begging for it. And whenever that film was made, 1990s sometime, I can't remember exactly, it was deemed that they should not do it. There's a hug, but that's it. And for God's sake, we've got to get on with life as a reality. Yes, there should be more and more interracial marriage, which will, of course, lead to more and more interracial divorce, because we cannot believe and kid ourselves that America is simply content with marriage. But yes, more.
And Susanna has a really good question. The old, who do you want to have dinner with? 3 directors, living or dead. Who would you want to?
Oh, 3 directors, living or dead. Okay, well, I would say Jean Renoir, the Frenchman, because I think he was one of the warmest, most humane people. I'm going to go for Howard Hawks. And I think I'm going to go for Jane Campion, who is the female director of the last decade that I've been most moved and excited by. So I would go for those 3.
Any other questions, anybody from the floor? Ted asks, what do you make of superhero films? Are they targeting their only marketable demographic?
Well, you see, here's what I feel. I think the medium is super. And I don't think the heroes need to be super. I like films about people who remind me of me, not stick figures born and dressed in armor all their lives. I have great deal of trouble with superhero films.
Thor, though, Kenneth Branagh had great reaction, did very well.
Oh, a lot of these films are going to do very well, there's no question about that. And I feel myself pretty archaic in my tastes. I prefer films made according to narrative structures that are not nearly as popular today.
Mark X asked, do you think the streaming world will change the type of films that get made, and will it open up more to the independent filmmaker?
I think that I think it's always hard for the independent filmmaker, and I think that when someone like Amazon is throwing that kind of money around, that people who are ready to make a film for next to nothing, like the $50,000 we talked about, those people are going to have a harder and harder time having their films seen. On the other hand, the internet is a place where it's more and more possible to see strange, rare, cheap, low budget, independent, difficult films. So the culture is shifting altogether. It's all part of the way that screens are everywhere. There's a screen down the road at the multiplex, of course, but there's a screen in your hand. Your telephone is a screen, and it may not be long before that telephone is actually embedded in your hand. It has become such a vital part of your life and your being. So the changes are going to be extraordinary, and just don't think that everything is going to be a continuation of what we have today.
Catherine asks if you can recommend your favorite screen actors to us.
My favorite screen actors, at the moment, I would say Christian Bale is my favorite actor. I follow what he does devotedly. In the history of the movies, Cary Grant would join that company. Among actresses, I'm crazy about Margaret Sullivan, an actress who's not that well known these days. I love Betty Davis, quite fond of Nicole Kidman even.
I want to tell you a funny Cary Grant story.
Yes.
We got a donation to the Lambs from the son of a long deceased member who was called the Dentist of Broadway.
Oh.
And we got a file we got a lot, hundreds of pounds of stuff, but he sent the records for one of his patients, Archie Leach. So we have
when?
the 20s. So we have Cary Grant's dental records.
Well, you should treasure them. Oh my God.
If I'd have known tonight you were such a Cary Grant fan, I would have held them up on the Zoom. But yeah, you can see his teeth and everything.
I suspect that when he came to America, because he'd been pretty poor in England, his mouth was completely redone. That's a measure of what happened to people who wanted to be film stars.
Well, this lamb, he was a dentist who was right on 42nd Street. Then he was the first person to take a space in the brand new Empire State Building.
Yeah.
And he treated everybody. And so he saved this record because he and Carrie were longtime friends.
Yeah, yeah.
Probably violates some privacy laws today, but everybody's dead. So
We'll pass on that.
So when you come visit the Lambs, I will lay that on you to.
Okay.
Kevin, I have 3 brief questions.
Okay, sorry.
For David. I wanted to mention, David, that I was interested in the book that you give great pride of place to Bonnie and Clyde as a really watershed movie. It has an enormous influence on American filmmakers after the 1967 date. Do you hold to that strictly? This was a really important turning point film.
If one was to do a book about the 10 most important American films, that would be there. That would be one of them. It changed so much, and it brought young people into filmmaking in a new way. It fused sex and violence, and it made our attitudes to violence much more complicated. So, but yeah, and it's still a knockout film, I think.
That's not one of the dated pieces that hasn't grown billboard.
Not at all. No.
Live Wire.
Yes, absolutely.
I was interested in your chapter on Nicholas Ray that you say none of his films was perfect. They were all flawed and yet all interesting. Among the flawed works, is there anything that gets close to being almost completely right?
Well, I think I'm deeply fond of Rebel Without a Cause. I think it's got some problems, but I still watch that film. I love In a Lonely Place. I love Bit of Victory. I love They Live by Night, his first film. So I'm fond of a lot of them. But
Johnny Guitar?
You see, Johnny Guitar, for me, not so much. No, I think it's really overdone. But, you know, other people love it. They think it's his best film.
It's one of a kind.
It is one of a kind. That's, yeah.
Now, what was your opinion of Mank? You write in the Orson Welles chapter that he was a director who courted failure. He didn't want to have a successful career. Failure was his way of being. He wouldn't have known how to do this.
I did not like the film Mank at all. I thought it was pretentious and fussy and overdone. I thought it had no real story. I thought it made a huge mistake in that it didn't really follow how Citizen Kane was written. That is a great story. So I found the film very disappointing, and I think the general public did too. It got lots of nominations, but people didn't go to see it in a big way.
No, they didn't, and most people had no idea who Mank was.
Well, there you are. There you were. Yeah.
The name of the film might have been unfortunate or too limiting.
Yeah.
There
was a very good book recently by Sidney Ladenson Stern on the two brothers.
Yes, very good.
Read that book. Don't see Mank.
I have read it. I've interviewed
it. I know you.
Terrific. Okay, I just want to tell all of you folks out there, really do yourselves a favor and buy this delicious book, A Light in the Dark, A History of Movie Directors, published by Knopf, the best there is, so it's beautifully produced. It's a superb book, really. It's delicious. I reread every word for our second interview, Dave. Every word, and I enjoyed every minute of it.
I have a huge thank you to you for your kindness, and to the lambs and every lamb or sheep that was in the room. Thank you for being there.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much.